Hello, and thank you for joining us for Sourcing Trends and Challenges in 2024, highlights from USFIA's annual Fashion Industry Benchmarking Study with Dr. Sheng Liu. My name is Stephanie Gaussens, the Senior Director of Communications at USFIA, and I have just a few housekeeping items before we get started with today's program. Questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question button at the bottom of your Zoom window, type your text into the box, and hit send. If for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. Our presenter today is Dr. Sheng Liu, professor in the University of Delaware's Department of Fashion and Apparel Studies. USFIA has collaborated with Dr. Sheng Liu on our benchmarking survey since its inception 11 years ago. So without any further ado, I will turn the floor over to Sheng for our presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sorry, I got a little bit cold. And also thank you for joining us, no matter it's in the morning or in the afternoon. As Stephanie mentioned, the first benchmarking study was released back in 2014. And I do remember at that time, the report was only about 18 pages long. And this year, the report was about 50 to 60 pages. My point is not that I'm now more good at writing, but truly I think the length of the report really reflects the growing complexity of apparel sourcing. And this also, really showcased the value of this study. Our goal is always to try to, very objectively, based on facts, very objectively capture the evolving sourcing trends of U.S. fashion companies, companies' outlook for the business environment, and also, how to really understand the impact of, critical trade policy and their impact on fashion companies' sourcing and supply chain strategies. So once again, thanks so much to the 30 leading U.S. fashion companies that provided their valuable input this year. As usual, most of our respondents are very influential players with more than 1,000 employees. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please, Stephanie. Yeah, so I'm not going to read the report, so no worry, that's too boring. But my goal is to share some of the key findings this year. Hopefully, you all feel more eager to read the full report after my presentation. By the way, can you go to the previous slide, please? Previous slide. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so after writing this year's report, I think two things really stood out. One is fashion companies report they're facing growing sourcing risks of various kinds this year, from forced labor, social and environmental compliance risk to geopolitics. Okay, and the second is the most popular way companies respond to these challenges, respond to these growing risks, is sourcing diversification. So this can include, continue to reduce China exposure and actively explore new sourcing destinations. Next slide, please. Yes. So let's start with the top business challenges. So you can see, really, for these 5 top business challenges, the word or the keywords risks really can be reflected, more or less with each of them. So for the first 2, top business challenges, they're exactly the same as last year. One is the uncertain U.S. economy, and the second is managing the forced labor risks. And the third, the 5th top business challenges, they reflect the evolving situation this year, from shipping and supply chain disruptions to managing geopolitics to the rising trade protectionist associated with the U.S. presidential election. Let's look at some more detailed data. Next slide, please. Now, starting with the economy, the macro economy, because somehow the economy sets the tone for our industry. So here you can see the red line, the red dashed line showcase the value of U.S. apparel sales. So yes, you can say the sales volume remains very stable, but we can also say there's a lack of growth this year. And I can definitely recall my personal experience. Somehow I didn't feel I contribute a lot to the US fashion industry this year. The same with my students. Now, to be honest, I think, something we can really pay attention to is Gen Z's, their shopping behavior. I do recall many of my students these days, they say they only shop secondhand clothing, because of the concern about the sustainability and environmental protection. Okay, so this is something we can keep in mind. So truly, when consumers, they're not that enthusiastic in spending on clothing, so it is with the apparel import value and the volume. So the blue lines reflect the latest data of U.S. monthly apparel imports, both in quantity and in value. And you can see so far this year, it has been, fluctuating, or at least there's no growth. So in quantity, it's flat compared to last year, and in value, the import value was even lower than last year. So once again, there's a lack of significant demand for clothing this year. Next slide. And two factors can really, explain the pattern showcased in a previous slide. One is the price. So yes, inflation this year somehow was not as significant as last year, but my point here is price is not going down. Price remains very high, which also means consumers still do not have a lot of discretionary spending on clothing. Okay, so when they do not have a lot of discretionary spending on clothing, surely the demand for clothing remains flat. Next slide, please. And the second factor is the lack of confidence in the financial outlook. So this graph shows the data of U.S. Consumer Confidence Index. To put it this way, studies repeatedly show whether consumers will purchase clothing or not depends on how they see their financial outlook. And you can see the confidence index has been declining, especially since this March. This is also why, or another reason why consumers are not spending that much on clothing this year. Next slide, please. Yeah, so highly consistent with these macro statistics. So this is what our respondents told us. So truly, the situation was improved from last year. So more respondents expect a positive growth of their sourcing value and volume this year, but still most respondents expect a low growth. It's not like a two-digit growth, but only a modest level of growth this year. Next slide, please. Yeah, the same with the 5-year industry outlook. So compared to last year, more respondents expect some optimistic view about the next 5 years, but still compared to the pre-COVID level, or immediately after COVID, this year's market outlook remains kind of moderately optimistic. So we're now fully back to the pre-COVID level yet. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the previous slide showcased the economic uncertainty and how they may cast a shadow on companies' sourcing strategy. But now let's move on to the non-economic factor. One issue is forced labor concern. So I'm not saying that more U.S. apparel imports are made by forced labor, but truly from respondents, their input, more of their imports are now affected by CBP's UFLPA enforcement. So compared to last year, more variety kinds of products coming from more diverse sources were subject to UFLPA enforcement, according to our respondents. And I think this result is also consistent with CBP's statistics. Next slide. And also here on this slide, it shows some qualitative comments from respondents. So you can see, fashion companies, they mentioned concerns from, Red Sea crisis, geopolitical tensions to the US presidential election. So all of these things add to new sourcing risks for fashion companies. Next slide. Yeah, and even in the area of sustainability and social responsibility for sourcing. So as in the past, respondents, they demonstrate high commitment to making their apparel sourcing more sustainable and socially responsible. But very interesting is the area they want to invest more resources. I do recall last year, the most exciting area is how to carry more clothing made from recycled materials. Now it remains a very popular area, as you can see from the result. But this year, the top issue or the top area companies want to invest more resources is to tracking sustainability and compliance related regulation, because we know more and more such regulations are being introduced or being implemented, and policy or being policy compliant can also create some additional risks for fashion companies. Yeah, so overall, you can see this is a very challenging environment for fashion companies. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so how companies are responding to such a challenging business environment, especially in the sourcing area. Let's first take a look at some macro data. So this used to be the most boring graph I keep updating each month. Why I say it is boring? Because there has been no change. It shows the sources of the U.S. apparel imports. Always Asia is the dominant one, followed by the Western Hemisphere. But now this graph becomes somehow the most intriguing figure. I'm eager to see updates each month. Two things you can really read from this graph. One is you can see Asia's market share is declining, which means U.S. companies are now placing less sourcing orders with Asian countries as a whole. Second, very interesting, the perception could be, okay, U.S. companies source less from Asia, from China, because we're expanding nearshoring from the Western Hemisphere. But if you're looking at the market share that is marked in blue, there's no growth. Okay, which means U.S. companies are not placing more sourcing orders with Western Hemisphere. Instead, more sourcing orders goes to the rest of the world, the yellow part, okay, which I think reflect companies' sourcing diversification strategy. Next slide, please. So this result is from our respondents. So this year, respondents reported sourcing their apparel products from 48 countries, more than 44 last year. So that's number one, sourcing diversification. Number two is, even though Asia remains a dominant sourcing base, including 7 out of the top 10 most utilized sourcing base, they're based in Asia. But for the second year in a row, 3 non-Asian countries, they make to the top 10 most utilized sourcing base list. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is very interesting. Even for these Asian countries that made to the top 10 list, their order has some interesting changes. For example, for the first time, India, it made to the top 3 most utilized sourcing base list. Or put in this way, companies report more usage of India as a sourcing base than Bangladesh. Okay, and I think this trend is also consistent with the macro trade data, and India's market share has enjoyed some notable growth this year. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the previous one is about the overall sourcing base. But at the company level, when we ask respondents about the diversification of their sourcing base, and you can see companies are also sourcing from more countries. Now, especially these large companies with more than 1,000 employees, a record high number of respondents reported sourcing from more than 10 countries. And once again, sourcing diversification has become more and more popular practice among respondents. Next slide, please. And associated with companies' sourcing diversification strategy, or one reason why companies they choose to source from more countries, I think somehow is related with China. Like it or not, companies are not totally leaving China, but they're placing fewer and fewer sourcing orders with the country. Now, very clearly on the slides, before the COVID, it's very common to see companies place about 1/3 or at least 1/3 of their products from China. But nowadays, more commonly we see it's about single digit of their products coming from China. Okay, but why is that? Why companies are there not, or they continue to try to reduce China exposure? Next slide, please. Somehow we can examine the relationship between, I think this is a classic question, the relationship between sourcing volume and a country's apparel export competitiveness. So as in the past, we asked respondents to evaluate the export competitiveness of some major sourcing destinations. And this year, we expanded the sourcing criteria from 6 to 8. Newly include criteria like minimum order quantity, the risk of geopolitics, and also vertical integration capability. Very interesting. Respondents say China remains a highly competitive sourcing destination based on economic factors. So if you see China's performance in terms of sourcing cost, speed to market, minimum order quantity, vertical manufacturing capability, really, it outperformed many of its competitors. But the problem is sourcing from China is regarded as involving high sourcing risk. And you can also put yourself into companies or our respondents' shoes. Do you dare to source a lot from China under the current situation? Competitive in terms of economic factors, but highly risky in terms of compliance, in terms of geopolitical tensions. Next slide, please. But another very tricky situation. Another very tricky situation is if you think sourcing from China is risky, but truly it's very challenging to find a sourcing destination with relatively low compliance risks or very low social and environmental compliance risk. Here you can see, the only two possible options is US and Europe. But based on our knowledge, we know these two places are too high in terms of the sourcing cost, and also their manufacturing capability are also very limited. So this is why companies have to source from a wide range of countries to try to mitigate the sourcing risks. So even though, I'll put it this way, even though it's relatively easy to find a place with acceptable sourcing cost, speed to market, but mitigating the sourcing risks has become more and more challenging for fashion companies. Next slide, please. And this is also why it's totally understandable that most companies, most fashion companies, plan to continue the sourcing diversification strategy over the next 2 years. One is in terms of the number of countries companies want to work with. Most respondents plan to keep the same number of countries or even want to add more countries to their sourcing list. The only difference is some companies want to work with more vendors, but some plan to work with fewer vendors. Next slide, please. But also very interesting, we further asked respondents, what's behind your motivation to work with fewer vendors or more vendors? In the past, we see some different motivations, like, if you choose to work with more vendors, it's about market expansion, or fewer vendors because you want to strengthen the relationship with key vendors. But this year, kind of, regardless of what strategy you plan to choose, they share a common goal, that is to mitigate the sourcing risk. Just, companies have different preferences, or they may have different choices. Some think working with, their most trusted vendors is the most effective way to mitigate risk. But also some think maybe, the best way to mitigate risk is to, to avoid putting all eggs in one basket. Okay, so once again, they share the common goal, that is to mitigate the sourcing risks. Just companies have different choices to how to make it happen. And next slide, please. Yeah, and also companies will continue to adjust their sourcing base to best serve their business interest. One, as you can see, the countries marked in red, even though the font is very small, you can guess which country it stands for, that is China. So despite the current market data, I see China's market share remains very stable, all kind of relatively stable this year. But based on our respondents, their comments, they're not reversing their strategy of reducing China exposure. So that's number one. Number two is there's also a consistent interest of expanding sourcing from the Western Hemisphere, especially from members of the Central America Trade Agreement. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of interest of expanding sourcing from CAFTA-DR members. Even though the trade data still shows the market share of CAFTA-DR countries still kind of stays very relatively stable. So we asked respondents what actually happened, or what prevented you from expanding sourcing more from the region. This is consistent with our previous studies, and also consistent with some previous studies I did. That is, the issue is how to expand apparel sourcing from CAFTA-DR countries, but the bottleneck is the textile raw materials. Next slide, please. So what does it mean? There's a lack of textile raw material access in the region. To make it more kind of informative, so we asked respondents what kind of textile raw material exactly you're lacking. I mean, the CAFTA-DR region is is kind of lacking. Put it this way, in terms of cotton and polyester, we do not see a lot of problem. So this region already has some sufficient supply of these two basic textile fiber types. But in terms of more specialized fiber categories, like viscose, linens, spandex, or wool, you can definitely tell a very or more limited manufacturing capability of the CAFTA-DR region. Okay. And even when you consider the U.S., it's not too helpful. Okay, not too helpful. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as many of us know, the conventional thinking is, in terms of the so-called Western Hemisphere supply chain. Typically, U.S. will first export textile materials to CAFTA-DR members, and then CAFTA-DR members will cut and sew clothing to knit the imported textile materials into finished garments, and then export the finished garments back to the U.S. for consumption. But the issue is, the U.S. textile industry is changing in nature. Okay, I'm not saying the industry itself is in decline. If you're looking at the NASS code 300, the 3-digit level NASS code, it remains very it remains very stable, or the value of output even enjoying some positive growth. But the problem is the devil is in the detail. So here on this graph, I look at the data at the 5-digit NASS code. You can clearly see, U.S. textile industry is making less and less yarn and fabrics for apparel consumption, for apparel assembling purposes. Instead, the U.S. textile industry is making more and more technical textiles, industrial textiles. Okay, so that's the issue. So if CAFTA-DR members can only use U.S.-made textile materials, it's very challenging for them to improve textile raw material access. I visited Guatemala this May, but still, I feel some positive kind of, or I see something very positive. That is, there's some growing new investment be kind of made in the region to help the region to improve the local textile manufacturing capability. but also, it usually takes time to help a country build its local textile manufacturing capability. So once again, if you want some immediate changes, we have to think something more smartly or really jump outside the traditional kind of box to think about how to most effectively improve textile raw material access for captive DR apparel manufacturers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is another study I recently conducted. So I'm looking at the actual products, clothing products for sale in the US market and try to see the fiber content. And you can see, very consistent with the input from our respondents in terms of cotton, in terms of polyester. Captive DR countries can surely supply a lot of such products, but in terms of more specialized fiber types, viscose, nylon, spandex, such products are much less visible in the US retail market compared to Asian products. Yeah, next slide, please. And also, I think this is related because of the limited supply of textile raw materials. It also limits the kind of or the kind of products that captive DR regions can make. And we know this region is very competitive in making relatively basic fashion items like tops and especially t-shirt. This is the kind of product we typically can see that were sourced from captive DR countries. Next slide, please. Which, however, looks very different from these tops. Usually, US fashion companies import from Asia, especially from China and Vietnam. Much more diversified, using more different kinds of fiber types. Yeah, so so the regions, so kind of once again, the captive DR regions involves a lot of potential to play a more significant role as a sourcing base for US companies, but once again, solving the textile raw material problem is very essential. Yeah. Next slide, please. Last but not least, let's quickly talk about AGOA. So AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, will expire in a few months. And I think how to renew this agreement has been a very hot topic issue these days. So our respondents share some comments from fashion companies' perspective. Three kind of major takeaway. One is, renewed AGOA received a broad base of support from US fashion companies. Or put in this way, this is not a controversial issue for US companies. And there's no objection to renew AGOA. So almost all respondents, they highly support renew this agreement. Second, US fashion companies see the long-term renewal of AGOA as very important, because this region is different from, say, from Asia. You already have a very mature manufacturing base, but AGOA needs new investment to improve their apparel manufacturing capability, to build their local textile manufacturing base. But investment won't come in without a long-term assurance that can help companies to see the return of investment. So long-term renewal of agreement of AGOA is very important. And the third, inaction will have consequence. So according to our respondents, 1/3 of companies have started to hold back apparel sourcing from the region because of the pending status of this agreement. And this figure will increase to half if AGOA was not renewed by the end of this year. So I think this is a very important message to policymakers. Get the AGOA renewed for at least another 10 years is very important for the region to play as a role as a sourcing destination for US companies. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I know because of time, I may stop here, but just to let you know, there are a lot of additional exciting topics included in the report, from respondents' latest textile raw material sourcing base, the impact of UFLPA on companies' latest sourcing strategy, how companies plan to adjust their sourcing base through 2026, and also companies' trade policy priority for this year. Yeah, so thank you again for listening to my presentation, and I'll be happy to address some questions. So give the floor back to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Sheng, for that very informative presentation. Just a reminder, you can continue to submit questions through the Zoom portal. To get us started off, somebody would like to know, with respect to the factors considered when looking at expanding sourcing to CAFTA-DR suppliers, are buyers concerned with customs issues and compliance with FTA rules?
Yeah, we didn't specifically ask questions about customs and CAFTA-DR sourcing, but I have two quick observations. One is we do notice the CAFTA-DR utilization rate somehow improved this year, which means more kind of U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR region this year utilize this agreement, which is a positive improvement. But the second point I want to make is, despite the improved utilization rate for CAFTA-DR, we do not see the sourcing volume went up, which once again showcased the limitation of relying on the current supply chain, to expand sourcing from the region. Put it this way, I think the problem is not the supply chain is not integrated enough. So it's not like, CAFTA-DR, they do not have an integrated regional supply chain. The regional supply chain is very integrated, but the problem is this supply chain is limited to some basic fashion items like t-shirt. Okay, how to further build such a integrated supply chain for different kinds of products, okay, through improved textile raw materials access, still I think is a very important issue to address. We definitely want to see this region not only can provide t-shirt, but also can expand, can gradually to also be a leading sourcing destination for more sophisticated products like outerwear, like dresses, and also these products will offer more added value. Okay, this means more benefits can go back to the apparel manufacturers in CAFTA-DR. But once again, without sufficient different kinds of textile raw materials, okay, beyond polyester, beyond cotton, it's very challenging for the region to play more significant role. So.
Thank you. So we've seen a couple of new short supply requests come through. Have any of the respondents indicated that the short supply provisions do not entice manufacturing in the region, or how do you think these new short supply requests will play out for the CAFTA-DR region?
Yeah, also I have two quick comments. One is, this is what I've learned from textile trade data. True, we do have some products newly approved for the short supply, but if you look at what happened over the past 5 years at least, the percentage of U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR that claim short supply actually declined. Okay, or the short supply list still has its great potential to play a more significant role to offer meaningful flexibility for companies to source from the region, especially in a case when they cannot find the needed textile raw materials. Okay, so hopefully, with more products be added to short supply, okay, more imports, okay, will claim the short supply list mechanism when they consider sourcing from CAFTA-DR. So that's number one. And number two is still, I think, this is something we've learned from the past. How to use CAFTA-DR, how to really take advantage of short supply list. It remains a little bit technical and challenging for fashion companies. So in the past, only these large scale companies, these who can comply with the yarn forward, who know what is short supply, or maybe they will also utilize accumulation mechanism. So these companies with a lot of resources can really take advantage of CAFTA-DR, but not for small and medium-sized enterprises. But we know there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises which may be interested in expanding sourcing from CAFTA-DR. So I would love to see more educational sections like the USTR did one a few years ago to really continue to help companies to understand these mechanisms, how to take advantage of that, also maybe how to further to add more meaningful products to that list can help the situation, can help improve the situation. So, yeah.
Thank you. Now somebody is asking for your crystal ball opinion. If the yarn forward rule is canceled, then nearshoring from the Western Hemisphere would expand, but the US textile industry would be impacted. What is your view on this thorny issue?
Yeah, I probably will answer this question. Yeah, this is a really great question. I probably will answer from another perspective. Even without changing the existing rule, I still see in the long run the U.S. textile industry will play a less significant role as a textile supplier for apparel manufacturers in the Western Hemisphere. This is exactly the conclusion I draw from looking at the latest manufacturing data. Okay, it's not like because of the competition or from Asia. It's because of the changing nature of the U.S. textile industry. The U.S. textile industry is moving from making yarn and fabrics for traditional apparel manufacturing purposes to making more higher value added technical textiles, industrial textiles. It is U.S. textile industry that is investing in Central America to look to kind of expand the local yarn and fabric manufacturing capability. So I think, regardless of whether we keep the yarn forward or not, in the future, more U.S. apparel imports from cafeteria countries will involve yarn and fabrics locally made in cafeteria. They can comply with the yarn forward rules of origin, but surely they're not necessarily using U.S. made yarn and fabrics. And this is also the input we've learned from talking to apparel manufacturers in Central America. So once again, so the U.S. textile industry, they can exist the yarn forward, but it's for different reasons. From an economic perspective, I see in the future the nature of the supply chain in the Western Hemisphere will also continue to evolve.
Thank you. What are you most looking forward to learning about in next year's benchmarking survey? What is the thing that you can't wait to see if how the trend is going?
Yeah, reminds me, I've another big project coming next year. Yeah, truly a lot of things we can continue to tracking. One is those traditional topics we included in the survey, and I think it's very meaningful and gradually showcase the value that we each year asked the same question. From where companies source their products, how diversified is their sourcing base, whether they're working with fewer or more vendors, and also some of the key the kind of changing competitiveness of major sourcing destinations. So that's number one. And number two are some emerging topics that gradually can play a more significant role on company sourcing strategy. For example, clothing made from recycled textile raw materials. So the supply chain for such products remains largely unknown, right? Recycled cotton, to what extent companies can really very confidently to expand sourcing such products, and at the same time be UFLPA compliant, right? And also, to what extent, or what kind of countries can really supply such products? How the supply chain for such products can be similar or different from the traditional clothing products. So that's number two, some emerging topics. And number three is some kind of the big kind of big trend, big issues. I'm always trying to to seek some valuable input from respondents, like AI, how AI is really playing a more transformative role in sourcing, how companies really engaging with the Gen Z consumers, e-commerce, how these kind of changing business pattern really affect company sourcing strategy. And of course, another big issue is who will be the next U.S. president, right? And we already see the Democratic and the Republican platform, especially the GOP platform, will propose something in the trade area that can have a big impact in our industry. And I'm sure Julie will have more comment if she has about the potential trade policy impacts on our fashion industry. If Julie wants to share some comments.
And just a tiny plug that if any of you listening would like to share your sourcing opinions with us in next year's survey, you can sign up to join the list for outreach on the benchmarking report landing page if you weren't already included this year. All right, do you see that sustainability, nearshoring, and friendshoring is a good opportunity for the Western Hemisphere, especially on issues like better labor conditions, unions, etc.?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I do. Two comments. One is from our benchmarking survey. Okay, each year, I think I've showed that in the presentation, we ask respondents to evaluate the export competitiveness of major sourcing destinations. So you can see the rating for Western Hemisphere countries, including CAPTA members, in terms of the environmental compliance, social compliance. It's relatively lower than Asian countries. So companies see sourcing from CAPTA countries will involve lower sourcing risks of these kinds. One possible reason is because many facilities are newly built. So they don't have a lot of historical problems, like old facilities, more challenging to be environmental compliant. So that's number one. Number two is really from my personal visits to these textile and apparel factories in Central America. One is I do observe these workers working in a production line. They're very happy, they're very dedicated. Truly, they're not forced labor, but really you can really showcase. I mean, you can really see the very decent working environment of their workers. And also, truly, all the facilities are brand new, they're newly invested. If we can continue to invest in these areas, especially when we're talking about textile recycling, it's kind of a relatively new topic. So which means even for countries in Central America, they can really build their unique competitiveness through new investment. So it's not like in many areas they really have to have a or they really have to struggle to compete with Asian suppliers. But in these relatively new areas, sustainability related area, they may have some unique advantages over their Asian over their Asian competitors.
And what was driving India to be higher than Bangladesh in this year's survey?
Yeah, this is India somehow raises some, or no, it just very interestingly become the new rising star for sourcing. I have two observations. One is India's textile and apparel industry or their supply chain is somehow different from Bangladesh, from Cambodia. That is, they have a relatively high vertical manufacturing capability. So they do not have to rely a lot on imported textile material. So that's number one. Number two is I think somehow India enjoys some benefits from the relationship with the U.S. and the Western world because it's regarded as one of the largest democracy, and also really the U.S.-India relationship is kind of strengthening in recent years, which may give give companies some confidence of expanding sourcing more from the region. Okay. But regardless, I think this country will deserve more attention, or more attention will be given to the country, or its market share may continue to grow. So that's my comment.
Do you see the push for circularity and recycled textiles to be at odds with the need for traceability and supply chain compliance, because it's so difficult to, trace recycled fibers and yarns?
Yes, we didn't specifically ask this question in our survey, but I did look at some companies, their practices. I do remember just last year I looked at a EU-based apparel company. They did a fantastic job of making their entire supply chain very transparent, so they can tell you from exactly the yarn comes from, the fabric comes from, the zippers come from, etc. Very interesting. For clothing made from recycled material, it truly faces some challenges of fully tracking their supply chain. For example, what if the textile raw material come from ocean? Okay, how exactly we can tell the raw materials come from? Okay, and a second, this is also very notable, is using clothing made from recycled materials will incur much higher transportation cost. So this is also something companies should keep in mind. You will face higher production costs, but at the same time, consumers may not be willing to pay more for such products. So this is why for many U.S. fashion companies, they still see clothing made from recycled materials as a niche, or they're still trying to figure out a good business model to carry such products. It's more than just about environmental sustainability, but also how to make it business feasible, and how to make it, say, cost neutral, and also dealing with UFLPA, especially recycled cotton. This issue remains to be solved. We actually respondents mentioned in this year's survey they want more clear explanation from CBP regarding recycled cotton issue. They want some assurance. Okay, sourcing such products is okay, or in which condition it will be fine. Or at least I will be UFLPA compliance if I source clothing made from recycled cotton. So we need more collaboration, both at the company level. Okay, the sustainability team, the sourcing team, the merchandising team, they will work closely to make sustainable products available to the market. And at the same time, we need more dialogue between policymakers and also companies to make sure that no matter when we talk about making new policy like EPR, it's a very hot topic these days, make sense to business, and also the enforcement of these legislation really can be business friendly.
And this is why participation in this survey is so important, because not only does it get written about in the trade press, but it allows USFIA to go and talk to CBP and other stakeholders and, ask them the burning questions that you guys have and help them, if they have questions about how to create policy. Because yes, it really is a situation where we all need to work together to make policy work. I wanted to thank you again, Dr. Liu, for joining us. And before we finish up, I just wanted to remind everyone of some upcoming USFIA events. We have 2 more webinars this month. On August 15th, Canopy will share the learnings from Circulose with us. And on August 22nd, Ashley Amadon, the Executive Director for the International Wood Products Association, will join us for Compliance is Always in Fashion, what you need to know about the Lacey Act. USFIA members, please join us on September 12th for our State of the Industry virtual town hall with USFIA's Washington Counsel David Spooner and USFIA's Customs Consultant John Pellegrini, as well as updates from our 2024 partners. And registration is open for USFIA's Apparel Importers Trade and Transportation Conference in New York City on November 13th. Please take advantage of the early bird pricing discounts while they last. As always, these and any other USFIA events can be found on our website. This does conclude today's webinar. As a reminder, all registered participants will receive an email tomorrow with a copy of the slide deck and the 2024 Fashion Industry Benchmarking Study and a recording of the webinar. Please do not hesitate to reach out to either USFIA or Dr. Liu with any additional questions, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.